Alright, so welcome back. So I made a video a while back where I wasn't too thrilled about the Hinderer full track, and that was easily the most disliked video I ever made. I said that it was built decently well, but I didn't really understand it from a function standpoint, and I think I called it an exercise in trend chasing. So like any other small channel out there with like 70 or so subscribers that just wants to grow, I feel the need to apologize. I'm sorry that I'm going to be doubling down on that unpopular opinion. I was disappointed with that full track, but I don't really think I explained my reasoning as clearly as I should have. You can think of this as a part 2 to that review if you want to, but I am going to be talking about another knife here too. But anyways, to me, the full track just felt like a knife that was made to sell rather than being purpose-built to be a function-first tool. It's kind of like how I feel about those Chinese knives that are flooding the market right now. A lot of the design choices on that thing just didn't really seem consistent with what Hinderer originally meant to me. Almost every other knife he came out with, like the Jurassic, the MP1, the XM18s, they felt more purpose-driven. They felt more like tools. The Maximus was a departure for sure, but that one has an excuse. I mean, it's a folding double-edged dagger designed to be symmetrical. You knew what you were getting into if you bought that one, but the full track was different. It had design choices that I just don't really think pair up with what people were considering it. And I wanted to get my thoughts out there. I'm not someone who's afraid to speak my mind, and if you want to just hear me echo whatever people's opinions are, or if you just want me to praise every single knife that's on the table, you're welcome to leave. And it might not be a popular viewpoint, but I still don't know if I agree with what direction Hinderer's taking right now. In that full track video, I compared it a lot to the XM series, and that's for a few reasons. One is I actually really am a Hinderer fan, despite everything that I say. I think the late Gen 4 XM18 3.5s is one of the best folding knives out there. You can probably tell by how often this orange one right here ends up on screen. Honestly love it. It has a permanent place in my rotation. And reason 2, the 3.5 is one of the most function-oriented folders on the market. When I finally got this one right here, well actually it wasn't this one, but it was something like this one, I didn't really get what the big deal was. I was a lot newer back then, and it was an earlier one that didn't really flip as well unless you actually knew how to flip it, but then I carried it. And my first time making a difficult cut, I remember there was a moment where everything just clicked. All of a sudden, I realized the brilliance of this design. No other folder I had at that point was as comfortable to use. The things that didn't really jump out at me when I was just fidgeting with it on the couch, they made perfect sense with force applied to the blade, and it shined in use. I didn't see anything close to that with the full track. So, at this point you would think I like all the XMs. I mean, this 24 has made it on camera a few times. But you would be wrong too. I've never really liked the 3-inch XM18s. With the 24s, it always felt like it was more to love, but the 3 inches just always felt like it was never really enough. Also, Hinderer, rename it. It's retarded calling this one the XM18 3-inch when you have an XM18 3.5 as your flagship. When most people say XM18, you immediately think of the 3.5. You even named the bigger one the XM24, so why not call this one like the XM12 or something like that if you want to go with multiples of 6? I just don't really get it. But besides that, I never really liked the 3-inch because it kind of had the issues that came with a knife that was basically just, well, a bigger knife scaled down. And I feel like if I had smaller hands, like if I was a kid again, I'd probably love this 3-inch. I don't have small hands, like at least the palm of my hand's disproportionately big compared to the rest of it, but if I had smaller hands, I feel like it would be like falling in love with the 3.5 all over again. I've always said that you can't just really take a bigger knife and just scale it down one for one and expect it to be just as good. Smaller knives need to be designed from the ground up to be small, because when you do things this way right here, design elements that worked on the original don't always translate over. Like, ergonomically, this one always felt like it was a compromise to kind of keep the iconic profile of the 3.5. XM18s are mostly made to be held in a saber grip, and I like the 3.5 so much because everything just worked. This thing just conforms to your hand and locks you in. It provides meaningful jimping where it matters to ensure it doesn't move. And when you grip it, all your fingers share the burden of supporting the force from a cut. Because when you make a cut, the force goes this way right here, it kind of levers off the pivot area, and goes down this way on the handle. And look where that force ends up right here. Evenly distributed between your 3 fingers in the back right here. And all of this while the back is perfectly tucked up against your palm right here. On this one right here, it just doesn't really seem like it's substantial enough. I'm left searching for a grip where this one really fits. And even when I get it right, it feels like it's too small. Because when I grab the blade right here, I still feel the end of the handle moving a little bit back here. And I just don't really get that with the 3.5. It might not really matter since the purpose for this knife isn't always going to be exactly the same as a bigger knife like this one right here. Like you would use this one for lighter cutting and the 3.5 for rougher stuff. But the 3.5 right here, it does not move in hand. I wrench on the blade right here, same way as before, nothing. It feels like this thing had melted and had been conformed and fused to my hand. Even like right now, just holding it with the 3 fingers in the back, it still doesn't move all that much. And that was what I really liked about it. On this 3-inch right here, if I choke up on the choil, it's a lot better. Thank God that finger choil was one of the few things that I didn't really scale down. But there's another huge problem here that we'll get to shortly. But long story short, you don't really have nearly as much support as you do on the 3.5. So you might be thinking, well, duh, it's a smaller knife. You know what you're getting yourself into. I'd say that's not really an excuse. Because look at this one right here. This one's the Kershaw Induction right here. This thing is priced at 40 bucks. It's a slightly longer knife. But look at the actual grip area here. If I line them up where it's even in the back, you would see that the grip area here is actually shorter than the grip area here. So the thing is, with this one right here, it basically has perfect ergonomics. Almost perfect, at least. And a lot of that comes down to just how the induction locks you in when you put force behind it in a cut, but you don't really feel restrained. You're free to move your hand however you like, and it still keeps you in place. For a 3-inch right here, it's a lot more limiting, and a lot of that comes down to this hooked flipper right here. The thing on the flipper on the 3.5, it's just big enough where it doesn't get in the way, but when you scale that down, you end up with an annoying hot spot right here. Back here, it ends up making the whole thing feel a lot more cramped than it should be. You should be able to move your hand in a few more ways, but then the flipper doesn't like that. And it feels like you're not really getting the most out of the little space that's on here. And if you get this thing right up against your joint right here, you're going to feel some pain. When I choke up, I feel this thing digging into my middle finger if I even try to move my finger in a way that the knife doesn't like. And I really don't want to hurt my middle finger. I mean, I use it all the time when I'm driving in the Bay Area. But my point is, it's a shame that it is the way it is. This hook right here, it gets a pass on the 3.5, but it just does not work here. A straight flipper would serve this design much better, because you're not really getting anything from the hook when you're flipping it, but you are getting an annoyance down here. And while I think it might not look as good, I think a straight flipper would serve this design right here much better. Also, a non-flipper 3-inch would be appreciated too, because I can imagine how much better the knife would be, like, just without the flipper entirely. You wouldn't have anything limiting your grip, you could kind of move your hand wherever you want. And I know everyone says this, and I'm sure Hinderer will cave eventually. I mean, he has a history of that. But I do want to see a non-flipper version of the 3-inch XM18. I feel like it would probably be the best version of it, because even on this flipper version right here, those thumb studs, they work great. I slip off them sometimes because it is a small knife with a flipper detent, but still works well. You can kind of see it flies open. This is actually still on bearings, by the way. It's not my knife, so I didn't switch it over, but I don't really mind that much on this one right here. I know I give Hinderer a lot of crap over his recent lock bar insert and tri-way changes, but I think there's a time and a place for most things, and the full track was not where those two things should have been. Bearings and that crescent shape cutout in the blade on the full track where crud can collect and affect the lockup, on a big first responder focused tool knife that might see harder use like the full track was supposed to be, it was inconsistent with the intended use. I don't know if I got that message out as clearly in my older video, but I'm saying it now. It just didn't really make that much sense to me. It felt like it was meant to be a collectible, not a tool. You look at this 3-inch right here. What's this one supposed to be? You know what I would call it? I would call it a smaller, pocket-friendly EDC knife that recalls a beloved overbuilt design. It's meant to take less abuse, but it's still tough enough because it hangs on to a bit of that XM DNA. That's a lot different from what I call it the full track now, isn't it? Different knives serve different purposes. You would not abuse a 3-inch the same way you would abuse a 24. A lot of the elements on the full track just felt like they were done just because they would sell. It was designed to be popular because it chased trends at the expense of functionality. And it was just not what Hinderer originally meant to me. The 3.5s were tough as nails, they made no compromises, they were less complex, they were simpler, and they were meant to be used and used hard. And that was done on Teflon with a great action, I'll show you right now. Great action, without ever needing a lock bar insert or a tri-way pivot. He basically achieved perfection with this one right here, and then threw it away. I was frustrated with that in my full track review, and I think it shows. But I think I got my thoughts more organized in this one right here. But what I'm trying to say is, just to bring it all back, the thing is, a lot of those same design elements on the full track, on a completely different knife, they would get a free pass. Like I was saying before, tri-way pivot, completely alright with it here. I still think a Teflon action would fit this one better because it's still an XM and the Hinderer basically perfected his Teflon actions on his late Gen 4 3.5s. But bearings are fine here. It's not meant to be used as hard as the 3.5 or a 24, and even then the external stop pins right here would take a bit of that lateral force before they ever get to the bearings. And then there's the fact that none of this really matters at all. It's all really just theoretical complaints and just thoughts, discussion. But I never really had a problem with bearings in all my years using bearing knives, so take that for what you will. The other thing is, this one here is a skinny blade. I've said it before how I don't really like how everyone is just thinning out their blade stocks for no reason. But here it works. I kind of see it with the design. Smaller knives tend to have thinner blade stock, and this is actually called Hinderer slicer grind. They have had this grind for many years now. This is the first time it has lived up to its name. The design is consistent here, much more so than on the full track. Also, it's the best factory edge that I've gotten from them. It's a small thing, but I do like to see it when people step it up. The other thing is, my thumb naturally lands on this jimping on the frame back here, not normally on the blade where the thinner blade stock might actually affect the comfort when bearing down on something. I've heard people complain about the jimping here being under where the flipper is, and they say they want to get rid of it. I say, seriously, man? I never had a problem with any of this. I use the XMs regularly. It was put on the originals for a reason. Don't sacrifice function for the couch flippers. And I think that's about it for my rants here. The only other unusual thing about this one here is that it's a liner lock. First XM to be a liner lock, and I can't say I'm a huge fan of that. Hinderer has always had design language with their frame locks that I always really liked. The hardware on a Hinderer was never something he tried to hide. It was always right out in the open. Some makers try to hide their screws, like the South African custom makers, where they make their screws as small as possible. And you also see top-end folders where hidden hardware is popular, but that was just never the case with Hinderer. He always made the hardware feel like it was a feature, not just a necessity, and he even made it a point of customization. I actually really liked how busy but not out of place everything looks on his frame locks. Like, you get the ends of the barrels right here, the lock bar stabilizer, that spanner end of the pivot right here, the filler tab, the clip. All of that just kind of works with it. Some of the finishes match, some of them stand out. I really like that. With the scale on top of it all here, a lot of that's just lost. Like, I miss the old pivot right here. You used to be able to adjust that one with just any coin in your pocket. And I like the look of the spanner side over here. The filler tab right here looks completely out of place being on top of the scale, and now the clip touches down on a textured G10 scale. That's a pet peeve of mine. It'll eat your pockets over time. There's light tension on the clip, and it's not overly aggressive texturing. So I would say it's at least very well mitigated, but Still not really ideal. I'm willing to give it a pass though, but still not something I like seeing. The lock itself though, his liner locks are alright. But the frame lock versions just always felt better. It always felt more solid. It felt like it was easier to disengage. This one right here, you kind of jam your finger in there and you don't feel like you have that much space to really get to it. So his frame locks, I just think they were better overall. So the reception to a new liner lock it's lukewarm at best for me. The other thing I made a big deal about was the screws on my full track. None of them stayed in place and the pivot came loose with even a good amount of Loctite in it. It felt like the knife was always trying to disassemble itself, but this one's, here's the story with this one. So I got it out the box, flipped it about 5 times, the pivot loosened up slightly, enough to give me a bit of side-to-side play, but only when the knife was unlocked. So it wasn't a functional issue, but it was enough for me to slightly feel it when handling it, but it stopped there. My friend gave me the okay to Loctite it. I did. I let this one cure for 24 hours, and then when I finally got back to it, flipped it a few more times, and this back screw right here loosened to a point where it rattled and almost fell out. Only time that happened, so I guess I'll just chalk it up to it being knocked loose in transit, I guess. But anyways, I tightened down those two in the back, and everything stayed since. Overall, still not impressed, but it might just be that it got knocked loose. And the other thing is, it's not nearly as bad as the full track. So the thing is, where do I end up with this one right here? Let me just get this out of the way. So, it's not for me. Give me a non-flipper version or a redesigned flipper version, and I'll give it a second shot. But this one is decidedly not for me. I knew that going into it, I knew that when I asked to borrow it, I knew that before I even unboxed it. But even though I don't like it, I understand it. It's not the best in hand, but the thing is, it doesn't really have to be. It's a smaller knife, it's meant to be something that carries well. And the thing is, even I could use this one comfortably if I hold it all the way back here. But if you have smaller hands, I can see this one potentially being the knife for you. And if you can work your way around that flipper, you might even really like it. As a fidget knife, just check it out. No denying that it flips well. And build-wise, I've said it before, but I'll say it again. I still trust Hinderer to make a good knife. I'm needing to use a lot more Loctite these days, but everything else, it's well put together. Centering on this one is actually dead on. No play when locked, no side-to-side play, even when unlocked. So it's a bit more annoying to close now since it is a liner lock. And also because the detent hits right over here, so when you're closing it, it hits your thumb here, but if your thumb's too far up, it just kind of bounces off the detent. It's still not too bad, you can work your way around it, but I don't know. Not a great place to end it, but I at least hope this video helps clear things up a bit. I think that's all I got for this one. Buy it if you think it's for you. It definitely isn't for me. Take care.